Hello, hello. I wanted to come on today because it is the full moon. And as those of you who follow astrology have probably heard, this is a kind of crazy, intense week, month, and most especially full moon. A lot of the energy is kind of like climaxing or percolating on this full moon in particular. Um, just a note, we had Skydancer open this weekend. And for those of you who follow me, Skydancer is my 9-month Venus initiation journey. It's a really great journey that is for psycho-spiritual adventurers who want to learn astrology, who want to deepen in their knowledge of the divine feminine and how that is embedded in us and how we each animate that in our lives. And we are on the ascent side of the Venus cycle. And so a lot of that is like looking at how we marry the internal with the external. And one of the practices that we do in Skydancer is looking at the current astrology and seeing how the astrology lives through us. So we had our first gathering on Saturday, the 17th, but it is not too late to sign up if you are interested in going on this journey with us. And initially, I thought I might just record this for the participants in Skydancer. I do a lot of that, like really keeping the participants deeply grounded in the astrological happenings in the SkyStory. But I decided that because there is so much going on in the collective, that I would open this video up to public and allow everyone to view it. So um, I don't want to waste a whole lot of time because there is a lot of astrology to get through. So I'm going to open up and share my screen and pull up the chart for the full moon. It just so happens that I sat down to record this at the moment the full moon was exact. So, and I love doing that. I really love sitting or basking in the energy and then channeling or transmitting the energies from the place so I can feel it. And what's really interesting and exciting about this full moon is that the full moon is in the sign of Leo. And beside Leo is Mercury, who has been traveling retrograde. And Mercury is in what we would call his Kazemi phase, or in, every time he goes retrograde, he's a fair ways off the sun, some 15, 20 degrees or so from where the sun is. And as he retrogrades, he always makes his way back to the sun, which begins the new Mercury cycle. And when when Mercury has a conjunction to the sun, it's a really good time to do like some Mercury magic and um, plant or put into the ground your intentions around any kind of mercurial project that you have going on. And so a Mercury project, Mercury rules communication, starting any kind of new project. So like if there was a program you wanted to run or something you want to teach, he rules writing, media, um, any kind of thing, any kind of craft or something that we create with our hands is also mercurial. I often think of him as the ruler of like plant medicine. He's definitely the magician, so he's the ruler of magic. So anything that you guys may have wanted to manifest, Mercury cycles are really fun to work with. They're about like 88 days long. You plant your seed at the Kazemi point or at the conjunction point where the two come together. And then you watch how that flowers over the next Mercury cycle. So from retrograde to retrograde. And so I sometimes will even like create a little altar if there's something that I'm really wanting to manifest in the realm of Mercury. And sometimes I even expand it out, like as Mercury is the magician, he is the archetype of the trickster. So he's like really good at breaking through structures that have been crystallized or ossified. The trickster energy is always something that comes in kind of sideways. And so it's unexpected. And so you'll see this energy is also in other parts of the full moon chart, this kind of like unexpected sideways, um, kind of like breaking up old structures. It's like a big theme throughout this whole full moon. But given that Mercury plays those archetypes of the magician, the psychopath, the messenger from the gods, so like this ability to hear, from the subtle realms or to hear from other dimensions, you really could place anything as your seed intention, or place anything on your altar that you want to manifest, and have it be worked through this Mercury cycle and this mercurial energy. And this is a big one. I mean, for right now, Mercury went retrograde in Virgo, but he's actually in the sign of Leo. And so if any of the projects you've been wanting to start you've been held back because of expression pieces, like pieces where you've been afraid to be seen, afraid to fully put yourself out there, afraid to be felt by other people fully, to stand in your full radiance. There's a sign that is ruled by the sun. And like our whole purpose in life, you've heard me talk about before, is to be our sun, to bring our sun out, right? And allow other people to feel us, to see us, to know us from the essence self, the essence of who we are. And so if you have any blocks around that, but have really been wanting to start a project, or just maybe online, on the internet, social media, or just to other people, if you have a message, something that you want to communicate, this is the Mercury Cazimi to do that in, with the sign of Leo bringing us a big assist. You'll also see appear by the sun that we have the archetype. This is the asteroid goddess Vesta. And I don't want anyone to get like worried about the strength of Vesta. Vesta and some of the inner solar system asteroids that we work with, they're very close to Earth. So they do have a strong influence on us. Vesta is in the asteroid belt, which is just between Mars and Jupiter, so not very far away from us. And she brings in the quality of devotion, the capacity um, to stoke the eternal flame, right? She's related to the Vestal Virgins, and they had a very important job in Rome to keep the fire at the temple burning, and kind of burning just so, like the fire needed to have a Goldilocks zone in a sense, to show the emperor and the rulers that everything was all right with the realm. And so there's this way that when Vesta's energy comes in, especially if it's around a project or something that we are doing, um, she brings that energy of like the beloved, like the ability to see it through. Like we're truly devoted to this thing in the way that the thing is the beloved. So, hearkening back to this idea of, projects or things that we may want to manifest in our lives, she brings in this really beautiful quality of sustainability. If you're like me, I'm somebody who has a Mercury Jupiter square in their chart. And so it can make it like I'm interested in a lot of things all the time, and sometimes I don't finish everything I start, right? Like I just always have a lot of ideas. But Vesta being here brings in that quality, or the capacity to be able to um, keep the fire burning for whatever project we're seeding right now. And so really feel into that quality as you are doing your Mercury magic this month, or this Mercury cycle, that quality of like, what is it that I am most devoted to? And that can help you get down to brass tacks around where to begin with your Mercury project. Like, what is the piece I'm most devoted to? Because likely my medicine, or my offering, or my service to the world, the thing that's really meaningful comes through that devotional, right? Like we actually want to invest and put our energy into this place. And so we want to make sure that the place that we are investing our energy is giving us a good return. Does that make sense? Okay. So this full moon is focalized. The moon then is always, a full moon is always across from the sun, and it's focalized at the 27th degree of Aquarius. And Aquarius is such an interesting energy. I mean, aside from the fact that most people, especially people who follow astrology, believe that, we are on the cusp of moving into the age of Aquarius or moving into a new age. There's this felt sense in the collective that even like the quality of time, which is ruled by Aquarius in Saturn's connection to Aquarius, the quality of time is even shifting. We are undoubtedly moving into a new paradigm. Old structures are crumbling, and structure is Saturn, whereas and new structures are needing to be mm, developed, cultivated, invented, right, to come in and replace the old structures that just aren't working anymore. I think it's always really helpful. If you followed me before, you may have heard this, but it's always really helpful to define the energetic quality of Aquarius. A lot of people know just like the pop culture mundane keywords for Aquarius, like the humanitarian, um, the progressive, he's egalitarian, he's the humanitarian, yes, all of those things. But there's a specific energetic quality that Aquarius has that's different from Capricorn. So if we kind of compare the two, it helps us understand kind of where we are on the map. And so Capricorn, which is also ruled by Saturn, all of the signs except for the sun and the moon are ruled by the planets twice. So for instance, like both Taurus and Libra are ruled by Venus, both Virgo and Gemini are ruled by Mercury. So sorry, both Saturn, sorry, needing to like reposition myself here. Both Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn in traditional astrology. So there's always one planet rules two signs, except for the sun and moon. So in Capricorn, the energy is like it's energy that coalesces around a central pole. So all of the energy in Capricorn is like in service to the central pillar, the central project. And that's why we get the keyword hierarchy for Capricorn, because that's kind of what a hierarchy does. It all of the energy is moving in service to one singular project. Or you can think of a beehive in a sense like this. Everything that's happening inside of the beehive is in service to the queen's project. Um, and that can be really lovely energy. It's so related to like governments, hierarchies, and things like that um, because of that cohesive quality. Like societies need a degree of cohesion, right, to function in a healthy manner. And so I get a little concerned that when we talk about Capricorn, a lot of times it's put down because patriarchy, which is definitely in its healthy form, a beautiful Capricornian expression, so is hierarchy. These things are necessary. They're necessary to have a functioning, running anything that's large needs to have cohesion. We need to have some semblance of social cohesion and social rules. Like the fabric of society is ruled by Capricorn, and that's somewhat necessary. Now, what Aquarius does is it's after Capricorn, so it's been inside of this um, energy that coalesces around a central pole where everything is, like everyone is agreeing to this kind of consensus idea of what reality is. And Aquarius is the archetype that says, this isn't working anymore. So the Aquarian archetype is the one who leaves, takes their energy away from the central project and goes and pushes like out on the edges of society in an effort to move society forward, right? So some of the archetypes that are Aquarian are, of course, the archetype or the mythical god Prometheus, who gave the fire of the gods to the humans. We've got like the heretic, the liberator, the revolutionary, the mad scientist, the inventor, the progressive. All of these are Aquarian and in a sense, and also, of course, the humanitarian. And everything that they're doing when they're pushing out at the edges is in service to moving society forward, to shifting the energy away from this um, central pole, from the consensus state, the conditioned, agreed upon reality that we all live in, and shifting it or changing it or editing it in some fashion, right? And so um, we can feel the manifestation of that happening now with all of the different large social movement groups, social justice groups, then the anti-social justice groups, the kind of shadow side of that Aquarian energy is like wanting things to change so much, becoming so ideological that we um, invest a lot of our beliefs into the external versus the exalted side of Aquarius is individuation, right? And Aquarius in traditional astrology, like I said, is ruled by Saturn, but in modern astrology, it's ruled by Uranus. And astrologers like me who kind of dabble in uh, kind of an eclectic form of astrology, we bring in both influences and look at both influences. And so the Uranian archetype is always in service to crushing those structures, crushing the conditioning, breaking free is a good word. Uranus is in service to freedom and liberation. So freeing ourselves from the consensus or from the life inside this kind of like walking around and putting our energy into this kind of central project and individuating, right, for ourselves, becoming ourselves. But in Aquarius, that individuation project is in service to taking the gifts we find as individuals and putting them, the energy of them, towards the larger whole, right? And so, we have to be careful. And we've got Pluto at the first degree of Aquarius, which is really going to bring up some of the shadow sides. The other thing Aquarius rules is like the perfected human. And you can kind of feel how that works with what I've just explained. It's like, oh, I don't like the old way of doing things. And so, I'm going to leave the old way and I'm going to individuate and I'm going to work on myself. But we can't become too navel gazy or self obsessive with working on ourselves. Another shadow side here could be like that we work on our trauma so much, we are never really living life. We're obsessively healing, we're obsessively eating because there's that ideological bent inside of Aquarius. It's an air sign, and air signs tend to be ideological, all of them, in a sense. They're very mentally motivated, right? They're motivated by the mental realms. And so it's easy when we're in Aquarian energy to get caught up with the way things should be, right? The archetypal form of something versus reality. And um, one of the things that we can get bogged down in, or another shadow side of Aquarius in the Aquarian age, is then thinking the new ideas are better, are getting caught up in the ideology, and then having group think. Like we forget about the individuating part and we just move without the individuating part, from investing all our energy into the consensus and then instead joining the group who's left the consensus and you know, believing so much in their new project around freedom and revolution and new ways of doing things that we've essentially given our sovereignty away. And so you can have something like groupthink or hive mind come up as a shadow side of Aquarius as well. And so these are shadows that we want to watch for. And for also Uranus and Aquarius rule technology, like anything that is like progressive are going to move us forward. So technology falls in that realm. And one of the other shadow sides that we're going to see throughout this period that Pluto so beautifully is moving through this sign, right? And he is going to reveal like all of the places where we are giving away our organic nature and our connection to the organic self and the organic world in what looks like a mirage of progress, and one of the things that I keep saying and keep thinking is like, we're not ethics testing any of the new technology that's come out. Like you can now get a brain chip, like there's really a Neuralink and AI and things like that. And so, all of these themes that I've just spoken about are things that can come up um, for review, or like we could have a big conversation around them. In mundane astrology, Aquarius rules the people, right? And we happen to have this full moon conjunct the moon of the USA chart. So that's important. There's something important happening right now for the US. And interestingly enough, we had our Republican National Convention last month, right at the time when Mars and Uranus came together on that demon star Algol, and right after Trump had that assassination attempt. And now, with the next bout of really kind of explosive big astrology, we're having the DNC, and the DNC's happening just as the full moon is happening on the moon of the USA's chart. And I think there was an astrologer who looked at this. Forgive me, I don't remember who it was. I think she's got a channel on YouTube called Sociastrology. She looked at this and said there's only been, since the inception of the US, a handful of times that we've had a full moon um, on the USA's moon. And so it's not like this happens every month or even all that often, that there is a full moon that is conjunct the moon of the USA's chart. At least, especially if you look here, the full moon is in a T-square, to Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, which really pumps up this energy of sudden unexpected surprises, trickster energy coming in, revolution, freedom, themes around we the people, and how the people want to organize themselves. And so I don't know that we'll have like all these the shocks and surprises may not come right this moment, but they're going to be seated, I think, here in and around this time. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens at the DNC and then how that evolves, especially because like I talked about air for a minute and I said, air is around the intellect. We are in now what we call an age of air. And so for me, this full moon is massive, right? So just what I explained, the sun, the moon, the Aquarian energy, and then that being squared to Uranus at the end of Taurus. And Taurus has to do with our values. It's ruled by Venus. So like what we value, it has to do with resources, our economy, the economic system, our currency. So all of those things are really important for us as a collective, but like even in our own lives, this is important. So that would be a big full moon in and of itself. But we also have this this Jupiter Saturn opening square happening. And so if you guys can draw your attention back to the solstice of 2020, when we had what we called the Great Conjunction, right? The Great Conjunction. The Great Conjunction is the conjunction that happens between Saturn and Jupiter, and it happens every 20 years. And what's really interesting is just the way these two planets move together as they make their conjunctions every 20 years. They tend to stay in a particular element of a sign in the astrology chart for about 200 years. So we were, prior to this first conjunction in Aquarius in air, we were in an age of Earth for 200 years. And you can see that through the Industrial Revolution and like all of the things that were related to Earth-based concepts like bringing in stability, stabilizing the country. And Jupiter and Saturn are planets that have to do with society. They are what we call the social planets. We would call like the moon, Mercury, Venus, um, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Moon, Mars. We call those the personal planets, and they talk to us about what's going on personally. And then when we get to Jupiter and Saturn, these are the social planets, and they kind of speak to us more about how the collective is moving. And then past Saturn, we have Chiron. Chiron's kind of thought as a bridge. He's half man, half centaur. So he's kind of like this bridge between the logical, rational, and the transpersonal. And then we get into Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and those are our transpersonal planets. And transpersonal planets are difficult. And let me see. Let me stick with, actually, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to focus on this Jupiter Saturn. So this Jupiter Saturn cycle began at the first degree, like 0 degree Aquarius, exactly where Pluto is right now. And we're finally in what we would call the opening square. And so along with all of this current astrology with the personal planets that move very quickly, like the sun and the moon, so our full moons, we check in frequently about astrology then, and we'll see that it affects us for like a few days or so. We have some like major cycle happenings in the background. So these are like longer cycle things. And so we think back to what we were doing, where we were. I had participants on Skydancer saying, you know, for the past 2 weeks or so, which is as when this square started to perfect, I've had, you know, like anxieties and stuff. And it kind of reminds me of COVID or the COVID time. And it's like, yeah, exactly, because it is bringing us back to when we had the opening of that square. And so any project you were seated back then, anything that was going on in that period, that 2020 period, I'm not even sure. Did we have a vaccine yet then? I can't remember if the vaccine came out the year after that. That I swear the quality of time has changed. And ever since COVID, it's felt like one long year. But yeah, I mean, I remember it being really it feeling like still a really dark time, and we were still on lockdown. And lockdown, in a sense, has a Saturnine quality because Saturn is very dense in and of himself. So he'll bring in density, and Jupiter expands. And so the two of them kind of have this push pull about, you know, like where do we want to conserve energy, right? And he's related to like conservatism, and Jupiter, like where do we want to expand, where do we want to grow? Jupiter's quality is around growth, spirituality, philosophy, ethics, all of those things. And then Jupiter is the one who kind of like can put the brakes on, and or sorry, Saturn is the one who can kind of put the brakes on, and Jupiter pumps the gas a little bit. And Uranus works in with Saturn in a similar way, but I don't want to get off track because we're talking about this opening square. And so we call this like a first quarter square or a crisis point, right? Like when we have a square, that energy can be challenging or difficult. However, if you were in the midst of seeding something great, like if you were building a company or in the midst of something that was leading you to build a company, these squares can be a great time to check in and to put like another brick in the thing that you were building. And this is, like I said, a longer cycle, and so it's going to kind of bring up this quality of looking at, like we spoke about the DNC, like there almost being a referendum on, you know, how things have been handled since then, you know, and where are we going? Are we on track with our Jupiter Saturn project for this Aquarian cycle? Are we not? And if you look back at the seed point, we've got Pluto sitting right there. And so what I feel him telling us is like, you know, we have to transform. There's something that needs to be transformed. And truly, it was awesome to watch, and I don't mean in a good way. It was awe and striking to watch how the conversation with COVID was so much around like when things get back to normal, when we go back to the way things were, and just being like, can you not really see and feel into the absolute evolutionary nature of what's happening? This is what COVID was like, in a sense, a Uranian moment. He causes these sudden shocks and surprises, and you can't walk back through the door, like nothing will ever be the same afterwards. And so we're forced to evolve. And a lot of times, um, evolution can only be accomplished through transformation. And so I think there'll be this referendum for ourselves and our personal lives, and for the collective, to ask the larger question around, like, did we do the evolution that was necessary? It's interesting because you look at this full moon chart and you can see down here. I like to pull up all of the information so that people can see fully what I'm looking at. They can pause and look at these different things, but there's no cardinal energy in this full moon, right? And cardinal energy is initiating energy. It starts something new. We've got fixed energy, which is kind of like Earth. It's preserving, it's stable, it doesn't want to change. It is like structure, right? It's got a lot of Saturnine in its qualities. It can be stubborn, hard-headed. The fixed signs are Aquarius, which is where our full moon is. Our sun is in Leo, and then Scorpio and Taurus. So we've got quite a bit of fixed energy in the chart. So there's this signature that's talking about the need to transform, the need to have a referendum on the ways that we haven't transformed, or how we've been gripping to old structures that aren't working anymore. And then a lot of energy that's saying, no, we don't want to change, like we're going to hold on to the old structures and to the way things were. And then fortunately, we've also got a lot of mutable energy here, right? Like there is a lot of mutable, which in a cycle of creation, the way the modes work is the cardinal energy is the initiating energy. It likes to start something new. The fixed energy comes in to help preserve the project once it's gotten started. And then the mutable energy allows us to make any edits that are necessary. So what's good about this is that there's not, even though there's a lot of fixed energy, there's still mutable energy to support the places that we find that we need to edit, if that makes sense. And so this square is important. It's going to be active for a little while. These are slower moving planets. So you have time to look at your life and say, what did I hang on to after COVID? Or during COVID, or what did I try to pull through from before COVID that just simply isn't working? And it doesn't have to be COVID related. I'm just using that as like a time marker, right? Like in these past few years from 2020 or prior to 2020 till now, a lot of people thought, probably myself included a little bit. I was less conscious, I think, for sure, before 2020. And I think a lot of people thought we were, aside from maybe not liking the political drama or theater that we had going on, we were living in a pretty good age. Things were affordable, people had jobs, there was money, the economy was on the upswing, especially finally from 2008. And so there was this sense or feeling that things were good. And then all of a sudden we had COVID come in and really reveal all of the places that it wasn't good. And so, like a big question, especially if you have things come up that feel like crises, is to look at, like, what am I holding on to? What am I unwilling to transform? There is always, with Pluto, him being the ruler of like life, death, rebirth, there is always a death inside of transformation. There's always a letting go. There's always like change that happens. And if we stay on Pluto for a cycle or a second, and we're talking about bigger cycles that we're in the midst of. So like we've got this full moon with a lot of energy, and then we've got all these other big cycles in the midst of having touch points, right? So Pluto is about to retrograde right at the beginning of September back into Capricorn. He'll just go to the 29th degree. And just for 2 months, back to that 29th degree of Capricorn. And Capricorn was that whole project around revealing government structures. I think so many of us were, under the impression that we had a lot of faith in our institutions, prior to 2008, when Pluto first moved in and the financial crisis hit. And then throughout Pluto's time, because remember, Pluto is the revealer, uh, throughout his time in Capricorn, he really revealed to us all of the places that the structures that we put our energy into, that all coalesced around a central pole, that consensus reality held up as good. He revealed to us the places where they're rotten, or where they're weak, or where they're not doing what they're supposed to do, or where they've gotten too big to fail, but they failed anyways. And so there is something, I hate to beat a dead horse, but around governments and hierarchies that and structures that work and don't work, that is closing out now in this next period. It's right around the election that he goes back into Aquarius. And so we've got this kind of like heightened period of him really closing out for the last time his time in Capricorn, and what might be revealed here, right, about our democracy, not just for the US, but like around the world, in your own countries. And yeah, and then we're gonna then from now on for the next 20 years, we will have Pluto in Aquarius. And I think this is very fruitful as we move into the age of Aquarius, and we are in an age of air, to have Pluto moving through here, really revealing for us what the shadow sides are. And I think a lot of it is going to be around the themes of, I do a practice with my class called True Beauty versus Glamour Magic, but around like what is real versus what is manufactured reality, right? That's a big subject, right? Like what is organic to our nature, to our bodies, to our earth? What is natural and good and nourishing for our children? What world are we creating? How much of it is synthetic? Um, these are all themes I've talked about for the last couple of years, and you can touch in with like my Pluto into Aquarius video. I talk about it there. There's a few other places that I talk about this, but one of our practices in Sky Dancer is really beginning to attune our system to feeling into what we're looking at. Is this true beauty? True beauty being like the grimace on a mother's face when she has a child, or seeing a flower grow up through the concrete. I use the example of, like, I'm somebody who has visited Palestine much of my adult life, and Palestine is this really beautiful kind of like organic, um, preserved place, and all of the building is kind of haphazard, as they don't have strong like city planning, or they didn't before. And so you've got so much imperfection in the way it's built, but there's so much beauty in it as well, because they would make these haphazard kind of like stone walls, but then you'd have these like wisps of wisteria and grape leaves and jasmine growing around them. And like it's in a mountainous place, and so there's like these vistas and views everywhere. It's really gorgeous in like its old world, ancient kind of feel. And then you go somewhere like Saudi Arabia and Dubai, which is this super planned city, which is also beautiful and cool, but there's something synthetic, right? There's some kind of glamour magic that is creating the beauty versus the organic. And so as we navigate the world, really feeling into, like, is the thing I'm enthralled with like a glamour magic? Is it just a shiny object to get my attention, to get me to like it, to get me to use it? Or is this something organic? Was this made by hand? Was this, is this embedded with a person's love, or with the intention of a machine's agenda, if that makes sense? we're also in the USA's Chiron return right now. And so we've got Chiron retrograde. And so, along with all of these other bigger cycles coming up, there is the United States itself. And I mention the United States not just because I live here, but because we know from a geopolitical perspective that so much of like the agenda. Hang on just a second. I'm sorry. Sorry. No, Mama, I'm in the middle of making a professional video. I told you I was. Oh, wait, am I? I can't. Oh, shoot. I must have recorded me getting up out of the chair. Anyway, sorry. One of my kids was playing the music really loud in the next room, and and so I needed to get up and tell him to please turn it off. Sorry. So I guess you're gonna see me doing that. Anyways, I don't mind. Speaking of like transparency and truth and organic stuff, this is just me being a mom and trying to record a video at the same time. So no worries. What was I saying? So we're talking about the Chiron return for the United States. So the United States a lot of times sets the tone for like what the geopolitical agenda is. And I feel like in a sense, there's this way that we are moving through a wound in that our president cannot run, his cognitive capacity was hidden from us and is now been revealed. We've had this happen another time, actually, with I think Ronald Reagan had something similar, but it was the first time, he's had to step down, right? Like from office, not run again, because the cognitive decline is so bad. And we found out. I'd be actually curious to see if ever any charges are brought for that, because it does seem like they may have tried to hide that from the public, which is awful. And I'm kind of surprised that we would just let that go. But again, there are other wounds, like when we think about the creation of the state and colonization and wounds around indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples' rights, um, slavery, like all of the things, the kind of like sins, right? Chiron is representative like of our soul wound or a fracture, right? In the psyche. And so if you think of the country like a person, a lot of times when I'm talking to somebody about like a soul wound, I'm like, well, it's an embedded part of your mythology. So it wouldn't be like you could have yourself be yourself without this wound, but it's like it's always been there. And this is something that the United States has been grappling with for, well, really since the civil rights movement, but even more so in recent times. But I don't know that we're always grappling with it in an effective, healthy way. We're grappling with it in a way that tears at the fabric of society and creates more wounding. And so if we wanted to be really conscious about this Chiron return and what's available in terms of healing, it would be like taking actual steps to um, like talk about colonization and the wounds of colonization and making meaningful, I don't know if it's reparations. I think for the indigenous people, it could be, like there could be some reparations or some further, but just furthering the healing that's necessary. So there's not so much animosity, right? Reparations, it doesn't necessarily have to be something monetary. We could do something like truth and reconciliation councils. There's all types of things. And I'm kind of focused on one thing, but one of the, for me, biggest things I see coming out of, and I've always felt this way as somebody who traveled to Palestine all the time, you can feel the wounding in the land around the theme of exile. And so many of us who live in the West, unless we are on our indigenous land, so we're indigenous people, we are exiles from our ancestral homeland, right? So many of us are. And there remains this kind of like orphan story that lives within us, like not being deeply connected to the land and being exiled. And so one of the things we can do to begin to heal um, that wound for the collective is to look at like where that lives in us. And so I've been doing ritual like outside on my own land just to kind of like heal and connect to the land that I'm living on, having more reverence for the land. Um, beginning to have a sense that we belong to the land. Like instead of looking at the ceremony that indigenous people do and like the adoption of some of that ceremony as cultural appropriation, looking at it like a continuation of stewarding the land. Like, can we be taught, like those of us who are interested, some of these ceremonial rites that they did, like, can we modify them to match with something that our ancestors did, and then have our own deeper connection to the land here, right? Like part of the wound of colonialism isn't just the act of colonialism, but the people who were colonizers were, in a sense, I guess I want to be careful here, right? I don't really care about being politically correct, but I don't want to take away from anybody's the deep wounds of colonization because they're deep. And so I don't want to say like the perpetrator is like the victim, but there is a sense of being um, us having to, like in the new conversations that we're having with social justice conversations, we as the colonizers put ourselves into the colonizers' position. And so we don't feel as though we have a right to connect with the land in the same way that indigenous people do. And so like taking all of those labels off, getting naked down to our humanity, right? Like we're all just humans and we're all just doing the best we can. And yes, the country has a past, but like what can we do to heal the land? And how can we come together in a project that heals the land and our connection to it? One of the things I've talked about extensively in Sky Dancer and even in the promotional um, materials for Sky Dancer is that like, there was a time when like if you just take um, Stonehenge, for instance, in England, which would be part of my own background, or I'm also there's also I've got Cretan, so like the ruins at Crete, and you look at those and see how they're aligned astrologically. Or even I'm in Ohio now, so we've got Serpent Mound. Serpent Mound is aligned astrologically, and you think about how the people, uh, you know, way back in BC, even potentially before the flood, uh, how they lived in this like deep communal way, connecting above and below, living around the rhythms of the year, living in community where the land was a huge part of that. Like even in England there was a goddess of sovereignty who was the goddess who preserved the connection to the land, right? And when the king was crowned, he met with the goddess of sovereignty, and she was the one who crowned him. And part of his like vow or devotion to being king was to be the steward of the land. And I don't think we think about our connection to the land, and especially with the story of us being colonizers, invaders, people who don't belong here. It's almost as if that keeps us separate. And so, is there a way that we can heal the separation within us, but also heal the land? The land is alive, right? And so, is there like a lack of being in sync if the land we're on doesn't feel a connection to us? Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. Anyways, that's a huge opportunity now. There may be things that come up during this full moon. They are kind of in a light sextile to the full moon. Chiron is. Yeah, so there is a ton of themes. I feel like I've been talking for a really long time. The other thing that I didn't touch on, that I haven't touched on, it's a shorter transit, but it is pertinent for this full moon, and it can make things feel a little deeper, a little heavy, is Venus is opposing Saturn. So Venus in Virgo is opposing Saturn during this full moon. And that can take a Venus who's normally feeling joyful and expansive and add a touch of melancholy. I always like to use the rings of Saturn as the example for like how Saturn works. And so if you take, a planet like Venus or the moon or even Jupiter, like a planet that likes to expand and be juicy and be alive, and Saturn's touching it, it can make it feel like there's limitation. Saturn can cause feelings like melancholy or, like deep mental contemplation, insecurity. Venus is also conjunct Black Moon Lilith, so there may be stories of shame, themes around the death mother that come up right now. And then, of course, we've also still got Jupiter and Mars in Gemini in a conjunction. And so Jupiter expands and Mars can irritate, and the sign of Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So there's this, like mental component to it. And so it's like you put Mars in the sign of Gemini, and it can kind of like agitate the mind a little bit, like, or poke at and stir the mind up, can stir like things that have been nicely boxed or tucked away or sitting or not being thought about, and bring them up to the surface, irritate them a little bit. And we can find that we're irritable or that we're quick to anger or quick to speak. And then you put Gemini beside that, and he just like magnifies the whole thing. So you've already got this kind of like agitated, nervous sense going on, and then put Jupiter there, and then it may feel more bigger or more overwhelming than it actually is. And so I've been telling people that so that they know that their sense of like agitation, the mental agitation or the mental depression, we can put ourselves into a depression that's mental, just through the thoughts we're thinking. Like that all is something that will pass, or to wait and see if it's something that passes. That's just astrological. It's wonderful when we know the astrology to use our discernment muscles and say, like, wait, is this mine? Or is this just something that's sort of being stirred up by the atmosphere that we're in? And so I wanted to presence that as well. I know people who follow astrology have been following this. This has been going on for more than a week. It's going to be like a good 2-3 week influence or transit. And so, yeah, just letting yourself be aware, like if there's extra nervous system activation, extra, um, you know, stimulation in the mental realms, that could, it doesn't mean like something's wrong with you. If you're not sleeping well, if you're, do the things that help ground you, but also, realize that like this is something that's just moving through. It's not that all of the sudden, you're like mentally unstable. So we also have the nodes at 7 degrees of of Libra and Aries. And so we're not going to have the nodes in this sign much longer. They are very close to Neptune. And so that can make our soul purpose, our soul projects feel a little foggy, but it also can give us inspiration too. And pretty soon the nodes are going to move into Pisces and be conjunct Neptune. And so we've got this like real nice expansive Neptunian feel going on. Overall, what I'd say about this full moon is that as much as it looks like it's very dynamic, right? It's not stable. So like the opposite of dynamic, I think for me is like stable, stagnant, like not moving. So very dynamic. There's a lot of ability for movement. And then there's a lot of like, we've got a lot of fixed energy here. So there's a lot of ability to maintain what's good. We want to transform in the places that it's organic and called for us to transform, not the places we should. Remember, there's a lot of should in this chart. So using our discernment to bring transformation into the places where we know that we know that we know. Inside our truth, we know that it is time for a change. And to let the dynamic energy help those changes get made. But there's also a lot of hope in this chart, I think, as well. There are, like, even though I talked about the shadow side of the Jupiter Mars in Gemini, there's also the potential to put things into action here in ways that we don't always have the energy or the capacity to do, right? And so if you're feeling overstimulated or there's too much going on, channel that energy into something creative, into your transformative work, right? Into the places that you know need to be transformed. Get your Mercury project going. Set your intentions for Mercury now. We've got like another day or so where it's still like technically conjunct the sun, and we can do that. I like always to do it on the other side of the conjunction, so it's not like it's past the sun. So today is a perfect day to channel some of whatever frenetic energy you may be feeling from all of the dynamic sky happenings, channel it into the Mercury project. Take time to set up an altar and think about what Mercury project you want to bring to life now. And in a few days, we're going to move into the full moon energy will die down, and we'll move into the sign of Virgo, and a lot of this dynamic energy will shift. We'll still be dealing with a lot of the touch points for these larger cycles, but I don't think it'll feel as frenetic. So that's all I wanted to say. And it was so good to touch in with you guys and see you for a full moon transmission. I don't always do these. So thank you. Thank you. Bye now.